friends, thinkers, and gamers. Happy Monday. Happy next chapter of our adventures together. I hope that you had the most fantastic weekend full of plenty of great literary gaming and thinking. And if I'm a little gassed, it's only because I've been over-preparing and getting hyped for this next adventure of ours, which is going to be quite a whirlwind. Welcome back to Tales of Praxis. I'm your host, Aaron Suduko, the founder of With a Terrible Fate, your first and final source for all literary studies of video games. If you don't bother reading books because you get all of the narrative content you could want and more from video games, you have found your tribe. We love to study the philosophical and literary content and theory behind what makes these games such masterful works of art and such touching and personal experiences for so many of us. In long-form written content, which you can find on withatterriblefate.com, along with podcasts, convention lectures, these streams, and a good amount of other ad hoc content in between. Grail, Padre, my dear friends, welcome. It's so nice to see you. All right, and some of us sometimes do both, which is good. We don't need to belittle books and the written word so much, but we are who we are with the Terrible Fate, so we got to give priority to the stuff that actually matters. But good to you for also reading books, Padre. Cheers for that. What are you reading? Tell us while I go through my intro spiel. Chrissy, long time no see. It's so nice to see you back. Catch us up on all of your PhD work and whatnot, but I hope you've been well. It's so good to see you. Friends, as you can see, we've had the pleasure of going on this Tales of Praxis adventure for a little bit now, so we have some regulars who constitute what I love to call the real-life JRPG party, who jumps into the chat with us here on Twitch to go through these live book club adventures, reading and making sense of our experiences in these JRPGs together. So it's so nice to see the familiar faces and, well, familiar handles at least. But it's also no barrier to entry. So if you're watching this and lurking or watching the YouTube VOD, I said this at the end of last week, but we are starting a new adventure. It's the best time to dive in. We try to make it so there's no barrier to entry. So many of us do have encyclopedic knowledge of this series of JRPGs that we're working on, but many others just love to think about the storytelling of video games and love to get exposure to a new series. So no matter what your background is, I welcome you, and if you're interested in the literary content of video games, I can guarantee you that you will not be disappointed. Oh, wonderful. I hope it was a great holiday, Chrissy. Cheers. The restorative kind is the best kind in my experience, so I'm glad that you got that. It's true. Grail is the better angel of my nature in terms of being honest with the audience. So we will try to make it the case that there is sufficiently low barrier to entry, but we will say one of the things that's quite fun about this series is we're concerned with understanding what all of these different games we've been looking at say in relation to one another. So we will bring in a bunch of background context, but we'll do our best to also explain that too, while also being mindful of spoilers. So we're pretty good at the mental and rhetorical gymnastics required. So if you find us talking about something you're not quite familiar with, just let us know. Happy to chat more about the details. And I am also a philosopher of game narrative, so I bring in a lot of philosophy concepts too. But my hope is I make those accessible too. And if that's ever not the case, just mention to me, Aaron, I don't know what you're talking about, and we can take a little digression from the gameplay and everything to talk a bit more philosophy, because that is never a bad time, no doubt about that. What is Tales of Praxis? What are we talking about for those of you who are new? Well, as I mentioned, I'm a philosopher of game narrative. I've had the pleasure of publishing and contributing to the little research community that I've founded and we've built together on With a Terrible Fate for a decade this November. And Bandai Namco's series of JRPGs known as the Tales or Tales of series was one of those that was truly formative to me growing up as a kid. Tales of Symphonia was really the first proper video game story that I played, and it opened my eyes to the possibilities of the kinds of stories that could be told in this medium, and also the philosophical content that can allow us to make sense of the world and ourselves as people. So it really changed me in terms of how I would grow into being a gamer, into being a person, into being a philosopher. And so when Bamco announced last year, hey, we're going to be remastering and re-releasing Tales of Symphonia, I found myself saying, you know what? it's past time that I dig into this series from an analytical perspective and ask, as a whole, what is the Tales series trying to say? Like a series such as the Final Fantasy series, not all of the entries in it are related in terms of world or a single continuity. In fact, most of them meditate on their own characters and their own worlds and conflict scenarios, but they all seem to rhyme with each other in a sense of being concerned with similar themes and motifs, and wanting to take the player on similar journeys. And so I decided what I wanted to do was undertake this series, which I'm calling Tales of Praxis, to do a comprehensive survey, at least of those games which we've gotten access to in the West, because Bamco hasn't localized them all. But hear me out, Bamco. I really want you to. We all really want you to. So don't give up on us. Give us all the content eventually. But going through them not in chronological order, merely, I like to say, following our thematic noses in terms of what makes sense to play after what we've played next, but starting with that touchstone of Tales of Symphonia, since it was of such personal significance to me, and trying to understand what are these games trying to say on their own and also as part of this networked collection of games, and how can they lead us to think about our lives differently, make sense of our choices and the actions we take in the world differently, and also how they impacted video game storytelling more broadly, even beyond the limits of the Tales series. So that is what we have been up to since March 6th, I believe. I said I was going to check on the official date that we kicked things off because I thought it would be nice to do a little something for the anniversary. And I think it was, in fact, March 6th. So we're not quite to the year anniversary yet, but we're pretty close to the year mark for setting out on our 6th full-length playthrough of a game on the stream and 7th piece of overall content in a different narrative context. So the numbers of the stream at this point are getting a little wonky because I'm delineating them to include the Tales of Arise DLC that we played last year for whenever we do end up going back to Tales of Arise. So this will be marked as 7.01 onwards, but it's the 6th full-length playthrough that we're doing on the stream together. So we've been doing two things for Tales of Praxis. One has been this wonderful series of live book clubs that I've already mentioned, and if you're here, you've found your way to it, welcome. And the thought really is at the core of a lot of the ethos of what we've been trying to do for a decade on With the Terrible Fate, asking the question of what is it to read a game, play a video game that we love, and distill literary insights and content from it as we would a novel or a film. And given that it's such a that calls us to interact with it, how can we decompose that experience into an active, real-time, interpretive mode of engagement with a group, especially for JRPGs like the Tales games, because they're so concerned with group dynamics and putting together a party who goes on an adventure together. So why not take the notion of a book club, but not have everyone go off and have their own experiences and get back together and talk about it, rather have this streamed experience of the single playthrough that we work through in real time, asking questions of, all right, what are we going to do next? But also, okay, how do we feel about what's going on in the story, what it's calling us to do, what can we take away and learn from with regard to that? No, Grail, because so it's confusing. It shouldn't be 6.5 because the single numeric advancements are for different like mainline entries that we're looking at. So 1 was Tales of Symphonia, 2 was Dawn of the New World, and then 3 and 4 were Zestiria and Vesperia, and 5 was Graces. But then for Tales of Arise, since I wanted to count the DLC as part of Tales of Arise, I made the number 6 numbers 6 for Tales of Arise. So if we go back and do a playthrough of the base game, that'll fall back under 6. So that's how we get to 7 with Tales of Xillia. But yes, like I said, it's not the most convoluted system in the world. It's not the least. Hopefully it'll make it easy to sort through in the review. That's kind of the most that we can aim for at this point. The other half of the Tales of Praxis series is more of my typical analytical content, namely long-form articles on the text and narrative content of these games, big and small in terms of particular moments that you might find and want to dwell on in an individual game, all the way ranging on the other end to comparative studies, looking at the overall plots of different games in conversation with one another, like Tales of Vesperia and Tales of Destiny, and asking what can we learn from seeing these games in conversation and as two halves of a greater whole. So if you're interested in reading kind of the more substantive philosophical work about these games, I encourage you to check that out. I faltered in the middle of that because I was going to share a link and the Twitch character limit cut me off. But there we go. So if you're interested in learning more about the series from the written word perspective and also reading the introduction, which kind of foregrounds everything that I'm talking about, that's the hub for it on withtheterriblefate.com. Encourage you to check that out. You're also welcome to take a look at our latest entry in the written side of the series, which to me marks really a nice touchstone for the overall work that we're engaged with, because it was the first article I published this year, and it goes back to the beginning of the Tales series to look at Chester, one of the first and primary characters from the very first Tales game, Tales of Fantasia, do a bit of character study on him, and also see how we can interpret him as a symbol and really a lens through which to understand and appreciate his own game, but also the related games, Tales of Symphonia and Dawn of the New World, in a totally different way that unlocks further layers of meaning in the ways that we're concerned with on Tales of Praxis. So I encourage you to check that out. We have more coming, including some which will continue to interpret and make new sense out of the other games that we have been through together on this journey already. So I've been hawking and promising this for the last few streams, but stay tuned. I'm working on something that I think you're really going to enjoy and that I'm enjoying trying to wrap my head around on Tales of Vesperia and Tales of Zestiria in conversation with one another, two of those others which we've already had the pleasure of working through on our live book clubs together, with plenty more to come after that. I haven't talked about the heart of the series in a while, besides it being personally motivated in my experience with Tales of Symphonia, but since we're kind of marking a clean transition to our next adventure together, I felt like it would be a good time to go back to it. And again, this is something which I invite you to read in more depth in the introduction of the series, which I don't cite that much, but it is something I took the time to write out just to orient myself as I was getting started a year ago. So I'll share that in the chat too. But why is it called Tales of Praxis? Well, the very first sentence that I say in that introduction is, the tales that stay with us are the tales that call us to action. And so when we go through this in-depth and intertextual study that we're embarking on together, we're kind of doing two things. First, we're approaching the games from the perspective of trying to understand what it is that they want to impart to us thematically, the lessons they want to teach us, and the tools they want to equip us with to go out into the world and act in different ways, like I was saying. But part of it is also, I think, a hypothesis that I set forth as I was starting out on Tales of Praxis, which has helped me to orient my own interpretive lens. And if you read my work or if you listen to me talk on the stream, everything that I say and how I'm thinking about these games is informed by this kind of background assumption that I'm trying to validate or better understand. Because I have this sense that what draws me to and has drawn me back over the years again and again to the Tales series specifically is that I feel like uniquely amongst stories and games, it feels to me to have this distinct concern with teaching us about what it means to become agents in the world, what it is to understand ourselves, the history of our world, and our communities in which we're involved in some kind of correct way, such that we can decide how to act in a way that bends history and bends the future of the world towards what we feel is valuable and where we ought to go as people, and indeed what our broader community feels ought to be the case based on this understanding that we can get of ourselves. So praxis, as distinguished from theory, is more concerned with the actions that we take and how we inhabit the world in an active sense, rather than just the pure intellectual theory of what it is to understand the nature and constituents of the world that we inhabit. And so that idea that I think to me points to the heart of what makes video games a really interesting medium by virtue of being interactive is that when you look at these long journeys that are grounded in stories and want to express something narratively meaningful to the players, I think that interactivity, according to which they call us to action, can very naturally translate into these remarkably sophisticated lessons in what it means and what it takes to actually act more mindfully, and intelligently in our daily lives in a way that does honor to ourselves and the change that we want to see in the world. And I think that the Tales series is a masterclass in how to do that. So that's the core of the questions and the investigations that I'm embarking on. If you've been on the stream for a while and you're an old hand, you know that our questions and considerations diverge from there into a variety of other considerations and things to investigate. So that's certainly not the only lens through which to see this stuff. And indeed, one of the virtues of the real-life JRPG party is that everyone brings different background, different perspectives, different questions that they want to ask. But that's my guiding light for thinking about these games, and I invite you to think about it as we embark on a new adventure into Tales of Xillia. The other structural thing to note before we turn more directly to Tales of Xillia is I mentioned this at the end of last week. I'm really excited because since this is going to be Aaron's first time playing Tales of Xillia, I know it's going to be harder for him to back away from it. We also, I think at this point, have our sea legs a little bit better for just going through these streams together. So we are going to be expanding the stream by an hour. So for now, at least, and I'll let you know if this is subject to change, but the plan is we're going to have the same start time that we started at today and where we've been starting forever, pretty much. But we're going to be going for 4 hours as opposed to 3 hours to get some slightly longer chunks to be able to look at and experience together throughout this next duology that we're looking at. Tales of Xillia to be followed by Tales of Xillia 2. And also, if you find me accidentally saying at one point or another Tales of Xillia, we worked through this over the last couple weeks on the stream. So to my knowledge, it's one of those names like many of the games in the series, which is not ever explicated in the game. But Pottery, shout out to you, my friend. It was you who mentioned, at least when Bamco reps have talked about the games, they always say Tales of Xillia. I have been reading it phonetically in my head for as long as I could remember as Tales of Xillia for whatever reason. So I am trying to retrain myself, but if I slip up, there's no deeper meaning to that other than old guy Aaron is trying to keep his names straight. So appreciate the grace for that. Speaking of the last title that we just wrapped up last week, Tales of Grace's F, which was a grand adventure, and we've already said the long and the short of that last week. So I'll just say, look forward to the analytical articles on that. I'm sure I'll have much more to say, but if you want some great adventures and discussions of that game, go and check out the VODs. They're all on YouTube, and it was such a pleasure, and to me, such great validation of what we're trying to do in this series, to go through that entire 130-hour and change playthrough with all of you. So I really value that. And want to thank you for that. I thought it was jarring too, Chrissy, so I'm glad it's not just me, at least. Oh, there you go. All right, so it's going to benefit you too, Grail, so I'm glad to hear that. Perfect. I love it. And as I've said before, I'm most interested, especially in the streamed part of the series, of bending to the will of the community and making it something that we can all enjoy together. So if you want to be a diehard who, counts him or herself in the mainstay party of gamers that goes through this playthrough together and the timing doesn't quite work for you, please feel free to speak up about that. I want to know. I'm always happy to tweak the schedule and be flexible for everyone. So, Tales of Xillia. I am so excited. I've told this story a few times before getting ready for Tales of Xillia, so I'll mention it once more, and then I will try not to mention it for a while, but I'm really interested in this one because in the whole of my review that I'm doing for Tales of Praxis, there's really just one major gap left in terms of the mainline, or what the Tales series refers to as mothership titles, and those are the Tales of Xillia games. All of the other ones I've either played very recently as part of Tales of Praxis, or in the case of Tales of Legendia, I played it quite a while ago, so it's still on deck for Tales of Praxis, but it's at least rattling around in my long-term memory. Tales of Xillia is an interesting case because I've never touched the sequel, but 2 different times in my previous life, I tried to pick it up and I made a little bit of headway, but I never got very far. And I'll let you know as we get through the game when I dropped off. The second time I actually picked it up when I was staying with my friend and colleague Dan Hughes for a while, who also contributes to With a Terrible Fate. So we got a little bit further that time. So we won't get to brand new content for a minute here, but I am really excited to break into to me, a brand new Tales game, which should be a lot of fun. And I really have virtually no knowledge of the sequel, but I know even just from talking with you all in the chat that there's a lot of love for these two games, and I have a feeling I'm going to be a fan. And it's really one of those cases where I think I probably won't have occasion to talk a lot about my history with the game going forward anyways, because I was thinking about this earlier today. I really don't think it says anything about the quality or the content of the game, with maybe a few exceptions that I'll talk about as we get into it. The fact that I didn't get into it, I think, is primarily just a reflection of me picking up the game at times in my life when I wasn't quite ready to sink my teeth into another massive JRPG and really do it the justice it deserved. And so I kind of registered that and didn't continue on with it. We talk a lot about games finding us at just the right time in our lives here on With a Terrible Fate. And actually the podcast episode you'll hopefully get this week that we recorded over the weekend has that theme as well. We don't talk so much about the games that just kind of miss the timing for us, but I think Tales of Xillia, sadly, has been one of those games for me in the past. And so this is certainly the right moment. There is for me no better context than Tales of Praxis. And so I'm so excited to have that excuse to really give it the attention and do it the justice that it deserves. Skill issue. Yeah, well, we know that it'll definitely be rife with Aaron's skill issues too, in more ways than one. Shout out to the experiences that we've had in the past streams with Aaron's various skill issues, technical in terms of the stream and technical in terms of the gameplay, but we'll work through it together. All right, Chrissy. Well, we can definitely connect on scheduling also if it's something that's better for you, because I know you're a night owl. I also know you're in the UK. So, but if you do want to be involved on an ongoing basis, I want to make that possible for you for sure. Yes, or it's just an elaborate excuse pottery, and I know the mutton joke all too well and have gotten away from it. No, but truly, that's one of the many jokes that I don't know yet, and I'm excited to get to know. So I will say this also on that note. The stream regulars know that I'm a bit of an extremist, although not the most extreme person out there when it comes to spoilers. So I'll just say, everyone, especially on the stream already knows me, but if you find yourself stumbling in particular, I'll try to give reminders of this, but I'm really excited to work through this and share Aaron's first impressions from the perspective of a philosopher of games and someone with the intertextual background of the Tales series with you, who has kind of no flag posts in terms of what to expect in the Xillia and Xillia 2 games. So as much as you can all possibly bear it, to refrain from spoilers of basically anything that hasn't happened in the story yet. Of course, use your discretion, but you know your boy would appreciate that, and I think it'll make it all the more rewarding in terms of a content and study for us all. So that's the way we always try to treat these games as we work through them. But since Aaron's flying blinder than he usually is, he mentions it all the same. So there you go. I thought that it would be interesting to dive into this one with a few initial remarks, and I really mean few, because like I said, I really have, in a marvelous way, almost no background in terms of what this game is concerned with, let alone its sequel. So I have a few thoughts basically based on where we've been in the past in the Tales of Praxis series and what we've been thinking about to put in our heads as we jump into this. And then we're basically just going to let it ride and see what it has to present to us. And you'll get a window much more so than with the fourth act of Graces or the Beyond the Dawn DLC or Alicia's story into what it's like when Aaron sits down and works through a game like this in a series like this that he cares a lot about and knows he's going to be writing and theorizing about for the first time, going in blind. I don't know if it'll be that interesting an experience to get a window into, but especially if you're someone who's interested in thinking more about what it is to theorize about our experience playing through games, and you want to see soup to nuts how that happens, hopefully it'll be at least modestly interesting to you and interactive for you in that dimension, because I really do want to make it as much or more of a conversation as all of the ones that we have had in the past. Oh, well, speaking of that, Chrissy, that's truly the best possible segue into something I had already forgotten about that I could ask for, and I wasn't even asking for it, because Xillia, very sadly for me, because you know I'm a huge pin nerd, I love to collect things that can honor the games that mean a lot to me and that I work through and study and publish on. I sadly don't have a pin for Tales of Xillia or Tales of Xillia 2, but I do, and those of you who watched our stream at PAX West know this, but I was able to pick up the collector's editions for them at PAX West last year, so I do have a little statuette of Mila, whom we will soon come to know quite well in Tales of Xillia, as I understand it, who was part of the collector's edition for Tales of Xillia. And so I don't have a pin, but I have her, and she's going to be joining us for at least this first introductory sequence of the playthrough. So that can be a little homage to this journey that we are embarking on together. Well, there you go. I think I accidentally unredacted that figure, Grail, but I appreciate you being even more mindful than I am about spoilers. So here's thought the first that I thought was going to be fun to dive into, thinking about Xillia in terms of how it's situated in the broader series. So like I mentioned already, in terms of my approach to Tales of Praxis, both in the games that I've been studying and publishing on for the written work, as well as the stream, I really feel like it's been rewarding to just, especially given that the games are not all extant within a single chronology, follow our nose in terms of what themes we're thinking about, what themes are being presented to us in the first games that we happen to play, and feeling out what'll be the right next game to play to extend and elaborate on and further dwell on those themes in an interesting kind of way. Pottery, that's a really great question. I'll interrupt myself to answer that. So yes, I will say along the way, especially because I haven't played it before, and I at least have not taken the time to find a side quest guide. If you know the game well enough, or you found a guide and know where side quests are, definitely please do, like we did with Tales of Graces, feel free to nudge me or let me know when the right time to go to those side quests are. That definitely, to Aaron, does not constitute a spoiler. I think as much as possible, I would love to do what we did with Tales of Graces F and try to knock out as much of the content as we can. And my guess, without knowing this, but just knowing Tales, is either there will be some optional content that's missable, or at a minimum, there's optional content that it makes sense to do at a certain time. So I will count on the judgment of the diehards as to when the right time to do that is. But yes, the more you can do that, the more grateful I will be. So thank you for asking about that. Cheers, my friend. I appreciate that. That's fantastic. So thinking about these points of thematic continuity, I was smiling today because I was doing some research, and I think I knew this just kind of intuitively from our conversations, but I wanted to check, and I want to show you this actually. I put together a whole new scene in OBS just for this, so fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be metal. No, it's not going to be that metal, but it will be different, because I want to show you, it's just the Wikipedia page for the Tales series, but one of the convenient utilities that it has is a pretty accessible timeline for the mothership releases, and then a much messier timeline for all of the spin-offs and secondary titles and stuff like that. But if you look, it's an interesting timeline to look at for a few reasons. So first off, if you notice, looking at the games between 2009 and then going into the early 2010s, we've accidentally stumbled into chronological order. And it totally was not my intention. When I decided to pick up Tales of Xillia next for our streamed adventures together, I found myself saying, no, I just want to do Tales of Xillia next because I know so many of us on the stream are fans of it, and it's also the last major gap that I have in the series, and so it'll be fun to fill the gap live on the stream together. But it also turns out it was the next major release after Tales of Graces. How about that? And fairly contemporaneous also with the release of Tales of Graces F, because you might remember the version of Graces that we were playing, the only version that was localized in the West, was really a follow-up to the original publication of Graces, which added that great Act 4 that we spent so much time playing and thinking about, and that was 2012, so that actually was a little later. But the original Graces was earlier. It's a crazy gap. There are a few crazy gaps, isn't it, Grail? And that was the other thing that I wanted to call your attention to that has me really quite interested, just as a theorist and an analyst who is so deeply concerned with the Tales series to sink my teeth into Xillia and really think about it from a series-wide perspective, because it's an interesting timeline, isn't it? And we can dive way deeper if we want to into the history of the development process and the different teams. I've mentioned before that's something that I don't know that much about, but is interesting to me to explore more. But even visually, you can see how back in the 90s, the series was just getting started, and they were getting the development process going and figuring out what they wanted to do. And so there were some gaps between the first few releases, which also showed some marked developments in between one and the next. So Tales of Fantasia being the very first one for the Super Famicom, and then you get Tales of Destiny, which already has some hallmarks of something that has been further developed. Something off the top of my head that was notable was, you get an optional character like Suzu in Tales of Fantasia who has all of, I think, 30 lines of dialogue attributed to her, if that, and really doesn't change much of any of the conversations and any elements of the main story, to Tales of Destiny, where if you read my study on it, Tales of Destiny is riddled with optional side characters, many of which are really missable, and many of which have quests and vocalizations in the main story that really do change things in one way or another. And then you have a jump to Tales of Eternia, which is a jump in a few ways in terms of scope and much more of it being voiced. And just many of the things that would become the hallmarks of the series being introduced for the first time, between things like theming and world structure and even gameplay mechanics like we were talking about last time. Things like mystic arts and hidden super powerful techniques make their first point of entry in Tales of Eternia. And then you find your way into the aughts, and it's a deluge of main titles, right? With at least one coming out every year. And it was fun for me to see this being a Westerner, because if you know the series, then looking at this list, we didn't actually get all of these in the West. Bamco, this is going to be my second plea in the same stream for you to please localize these eventually. So being in the West, you didn't get this impression that they were just churning them out, but oh mama, were they churning them out in the aughts. And so it's interesting, because going through the ones that we have access to for Tales of Praxis, you can still see how they're playing with the nuances of their battle systems and the stories they want to tell and the themes that they're talking about. But they do seem more or less of a piece with one another, in a way that there's less radical distinctions between how they're representing their content and what it is that they're trying to say than there are, say, between something like Tales of Vesperia and Tales of Destiny, with that much larger gap in between them, right? And then you get into the 2010s, and the gaps kind of come back, which is interesting because, again, and this is going to why I'm excited about Tales of Xillia, one of the main little islands in this kind of nebula of nothing that we have in the 2010s is Tales of Xillia and Tales of Xillia 2. So I can't really speak to that one yet. But if you think about what people say regarding Tales of Zestiria and Tales of Vesperia and Tales of Arise, those are all marked by pretty radical developmental shifts in how the teams were telling stories, what it was that they wanted to say, really everything soup to nuts, where say what you will about Tales of Zestiria and Vesperia, and we will continue to say what we will about them, but they're very different in terms of their perspective on the world, things as simple as what the world map looks like, how you're able to move the camera and navigating it, the equipment system, and I would say even some of the themes and the structure of the stories that they're trying to tell, all the way down to the characters and the mode of character study that we get in those games, which is part of what I'm thinking about for my upcoming publication. And then Tales of Arise, if you've played that, among many other changes to things like the world navigation and the story structure, they also basically rebuilt a lot of the battle system. So it also feels very different. So I was looking at the timeline and just thinking, man, how interesting that we've had this series for almost 30 years at this point. Shout out to Bamco for keeping it going for that long, or really to Namco, but also to Bamco. But it's also a really interesting history with some points of just prolific production punctuated by relative troughs of production with these little islands of mainline releases in there. And given that the other gaps that we've had have marked some pretty big transitions and changes in the series, that makes me really interested from kind of a history of gaming perspective and thinking about the development of these games over time to ask, okay, as we go into Tales of Xillia, especially after having played through Graces together and also Zestiria and Vesperia together, how can we see this as kind of a midpoint in the evolution of the series, since we know and have pretty direct and recent exposure to what came immediately before and what came immediately after. And of course, that might be the most obvious going into it in terms of things like how the world is graphically represented, how its gameplay systems work, how the battle system plays, things like that. But like I said, the more I was sitting down and thinking about it, I do feel like there are some interesting ways in which you can talk about the evolution of how they've been trying to tell their stories or the themes that they're concerned with as well. From my kind of philosophical analytic perspective, I don't oftentimes foreground that kind of historical analysis because it's just not my bailiwick, but I couldn't help but become interested in it based on the context into which we're entering this journey of Tales of Xillia. And so it's on my mind. I think it'll be fun for us to keep in our minds collectively as we jump into this. Yeah, Pottery, it is interesting, right? That Tempest is on here because for those of you that don't know, Tempest was one that was treated as a mothership release, and then kind of the thought or the theory is because it was poorly received in Japan, Bamco kind of backed off from that and then kind of remarked it as a spin-off rather than a mothership title. But I think because it was originally intended as such, I think that is the intention of Wikipedia, for what it's worth. Oh yeah, Chrissy, so just catching up on comments quick. Yeah, Grail is absolutely trolling you. It's a running gag on the stream because I loved Eternia so much and brought it up so much during the Tales of Graces study that it's kind of it's an open question whether it might now feel like my favorite game instead of Tales of the Abyss. I'll let the other people hanging on the stream be the judge of that because I think they're actually better judges of it than I am, but especially because it's one of the older games and for that reason one of the cornerstones of the series, but also one of the ones that sadly is harder to access these days. I've been really eager not only to publish on it but also plan something of an ad hoc extra stream around it, maybe, because I want everyone to be able to have that experience and talk through it with them. So stay tuned for that too. I'm noodling how to do that. So there you go. So Grail is saying he's pretty sure that Xillia was the second or maybe the best-selling game in the series until Arise released. That's really interesting, Grail. I got interested because they do talk a little bit about the sales figures on the wiki page as well. That's not something I'm as familiar with, but it'll be cool to look into as we kind of deepen our collective encyclopedic knowledge of the series and perhaps what motivated them to deal with it in different ways. Yeah, so that's my thought on the timeline, and I think it will be fun to go back to that as we continue on this adventure together. Other first thoughts that I had are really just things that'll be on my mind as we jump into this. So like I mentioned, remember, since I'm not going to mention it that much going forward because it's really just a touchstone in the background for the most part, but it's nice to bring up. I am really concerned with Tales of Praxis, especially as we're getting further along and thinking about more of these games in conversation with one another in terms of this question of how can we piece together something like an overall philosophy of action from these games in terms of what it is to act cogently as an individual in a way that does honor to our identity, our place in the world, our communities, and what it is that we intend to bring about. So especially now that we have more pieces of the puzzle in terms of how these different games are thinking about slightly different steps in that process of acting and understanding ourselves. I'm definitely going to be asking the question as we go through here. All right, how is Tales of Xillia slotting into that puzzle? How is it maybe adding new questions into that philosophical exercise, or maybe challenging some of the assumptions that we had coming out of the prior games? Things like that. Filling in the blank in the development of the series, like I mentioned already. Also, I'm going to be really interested in, even in Tales of Xillia, this first one that we're going to be playing together, keeping one eye on the fact that it has a direct sequel that is actually called Tales of Xillia 2. You might remember, if you've been hanging out on Tales of Praxis for a while, we've played multiple games and DLC at this point that are various forms of follow-up to mothership titles in the series. Things like Tales of Symphonia, Dawn of the New World after Tales of Symphonia, and things like Tales of Vesperia, which was a prequel to Tales of Zestiria. But one of the things which I've noted time and again, because I think it's really interesting, is that those games are not given the names Tales of Symphonia 2 or Tales of Zestiria 2. They're given names that allow them to stand on their own terms, and to me, I think, signal that they are interested in something that supplements the prior title without being a mere direct continuation of it, and saying something different, maybe being a commentary on the early title, like we've talked about in terms of Vesperia and also Dawn of the New World, maybe doing something different altogether. But we're not going to be in that territory anymore. Now we're going to be in one of those rare cases in the Tales series where there actually is a full-blooded, direct, named sequel that just goes right to the number 2. It's not the first time that they did it. They also have an actual Tales of Destiny 2, not to be concerned with Tales of Eternia, which was incorrectly localized for a few different reasons as Tales of Destiny 2 in the West. There is actually a numerical sequel to Tales of Destiny, which sadly hasn't been localized in the West. But Tales of Xillia 2 is the only case of a mothership sequel that is properly and directly named as such that we've gotten localized in the West. So especially since we've had a few of these other flavors of follow-up games, I'm going to be really tuned in, especially once we get into the sequel, to the questions of what is it about the particular structure of this duology that warrants that, or that asks its player to come in with a different frame of reference relative to those other models that we've had and played through together in past games on the stream. I'm also going to be concerned in this game in a really fun way for me with the idea of multiple perspectives. So that you're going to find this out pretty immediately as we get into the game. But one of the things that it says on the back of the box, which I'll also read you in a moment because I think it's nice to be on the same page there, is that one of the hallmarks of this game that made it different than things that had come before in the series is that it's a story that is told from two perspectives, in the sense that there are two protagonists in it who are presented, at least at the beginning, which is all I know, on equal footing with one another, and you can choose which one of them you want to ground your perspective as you work through the story. I think that idea of telling the same story from different perspectives in an interactive medium like video games, where your actions can determine the actions that are taken by the character whose perspective you share, is a really nuanced and complicated and very interesting aesthetic effect to consider, which, because of those interactive components, I feel and have argued for a long time, makes the experience markedly different from something like simply shifting perspective when you're reading a novel or watching a film or something like that. I think it's an ontologically different exercise, and it's something which I can share with you. It was actually one of my first publications on Dishonored. So not a JRPG, because like I've said before, hilariously, when I started out in the study of video games, it was rare for me to look at JRPGs, even though right now in Tales of Praxis, that's basically all that I'm doing. But if you're interested in sort of a dissection from a philosophical perspective on how literary shifts in point of view work differently in video games, I encourage you to check that out. But I think it's really fun for that reason to see how games can play with perspective shifts exactly like the kind that we're going to be going into here. I loved Birth by Sleep in the Kingdom Hearts franchise for that reason. The Nier series, shout out to Yoko Taro, that beautiful madman, plays with perspective quite a lot. And I think that's one of the many reasons it's tremendously interesting. So I'm going to be curious to see how this game puts a distinctly Tales flavor and Tales spin on the thematic content of those kinds of perspective shifts. I'm not sure how much of that we'll be able to see in the one playthrough from one perspective that we'll probably be doing on the stream, because just for the sake of keeping the stream lively and engaged and moving forward, I'll probably only play through one of the protagonist perspectives on stream, like we were talking about last time. but I imagine we'll get a sense for how it might be playing with perspectives through that. And I'll be doing the other perspective off stream. So certainly we can keep talking about that as we go on to Tales of Xillia 2. Also, like I say, that's something that the game is known for, and it's certainly innovative in that way in the Tales series. But it's worth pointing out, it's also going to be cool in the game history perspective that we talked about as a way of going back to the Tales series roots. Because this is where, again, it pays dividends to play those early games that still stand on their own 2 feet and say really interesting things decades later. Because going all the way back to Tales of Eternia, and I'm not going to say too much about this because I don't want to spoil any of it for when we inevitably play it together, but Grail at least will know what I'm talking about. Some of the most interesting and unexpected sequences in that game are centrally concerned with changes in perspective of the kind that I'm talking about. It's not something that you get in a lot of the Tales series, but I think that's part of what makes it distinctive and quite memorable and impactful in Tales of Eternia. And so for that reason, as much as all the others, seeing it anchor a mainline title with Tales of Xillia is going to be really interesting to me. So I'll be keeping an eye on that too. And then finally, especially after going through Tales of Grace's F, I'm going to be interested to go back to a world where, judging by the back of the box, we're going to be concerned again with the idea of mana as the lifeblood of the world and this kind of magical, ethereal substrate that makes magic possible, maybe makes life possible. We'll see what the game has to say about that. Because like I mentioned during Tales of Grace's F, there's a number of games in the Tales series that are directly concerned with this specific type of metaphysical substance that makes life possible. That is mana. The Xillia games, so Tales of Fantasia and Tales of Symphonia and Dawn of the New World, all are anchored by this notion of mana and what it means for the world and whether or not it's necessary. Tales of Vesperia also is centrally concerned with mana in a way that kind of elaborates our understanding of it from the Xillia games if we'd played those prior to it. And now we're going to be going back to a mana-grounded world. But like I was saying last time, it is not something that we can expect series-wide as just the game's placeholder for whatever magical force makes life possible. Because in something like Tales of Graces, not something like, in just Tales of Graces, actually, we have Eleth, which seems to fulfill maybe a similar function, but it has a different name, and the things that seem like summon spirits that are made possible by it also have different names. And in Tales of Eternia, we have something that feels kind of similar to mana, but it's also importantly not mana. It's all about these little life forms called Kramels, in a way that marks it as distinctive, and I think also thematically distinctive from what these mana-based games are trying to say. So, filling in a gap in the series that also is one that brings us back to these considerations of mana, for me is going to be really fun in asking sort of the say, philosopher of science / philosopher of literature question of what are the different properties of mana that straddle all of these different games that bring up mana, and then from a thematic perspective in terms of what these games are trying to say to us, how can we interpret mana symbolically with those properties in mind in order to understand those games and their messages a little bit differently, and maybe even to get a firmer handle on what the games that don't dabble in mana have to say to us. So those are all the things that are going to be on my mind going into this, except to further just say I'm truly just honored and humbled by the opportunity to do something that is a first time for me, playing through an entire full-length title on stream for the first time with no background experience, but just bolstered by the experience and shared interest of this real-life JRPG party that's interested in reading it and uncovering its meaning in terms of our playthrough and also in terms of its place within the broader series with me. So that's really special to me. I hope you know how much I appreciate that. And I think, you know, going into our 7th installment of Tales of Praxis, almost a year on, I think it is beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're going to have a lot of fun together doing it and unpacking everything that this game has to say. So I can't wait for that, and we don't need to wait for that. And thanks to the extended stream time, even with Aaron's extended thoughts getting set up here, we're going to have well over 3 hours to begin our journey together, my friends. Imagine sitting on the PS3 home screen with that song playing on blast. Can you hear the song right now? I thought it wasn't on the audio mix right now. That's funny if you can hear it maybe even through my headphones or something. But yes, I have been enjoying the... we can even go to that now because we're about to get started. But that's been what's in the background for me as I've been giving my prelude, which kind of, I guess in the opposite sense of the EX dungeon music for Tales of Graces F, this has been the perfect note of pointed inspiration with which to give these grounding thoughts and set off on this new adventure together. So cheers to that. Oh, that makes sense. Yes, I accidentally left that audio input in for the wiki page. But hey, a wiki page for something like the Tales series deserves its own theme music. And what better music than this, right? Tales of Graces. Tales of Graces, excuse me. See, Aaron still needs to update his references. We're getting started. It's the first stream. It's Monday. Tales of Xillia. So, on the back of the box, so we can all be grounded in this together, back from the days when we could count on games having a box. But you should still be getting boxes for your games. That's Aaron's didactic insistence for gaming in 2024. 2 heroes, 2 nations, 2 ideologies, 1 struggle. Follow Jude Mathis, a clever medical student, and Mila Maxwell, a mysterious woman, at the outset of their adventure through the world of Rize Maxia. After discovering that the kingdom of Rashagal has been experimenting with a powerful device that has been draining the mana from the world, Mila and Jude set off on a journey to destroy it and restore the mana back to the world. And that's all they give us. So, fairly standard stakes, with the kind of caveats that I mentioned in terms of going back to a world with mana, and having 2 heroes with 2 perspectives. Although also interesting since sometimes it can be quite an effort to discover the name of the world in these games, I've noticed, as I've been diving deeper into them and needing to find the names in order to refer to them in my publications on them. Interesting that in this game they put the name of the world right there, smack dab in that succinct description. We're in Rize Maxia. That is the name of this world. We have a new basis for engaging with this new story. There you go, Pottery. And if my preamble can have that utilitarian function for a mainstay like you, so much the better. See, we're getting into a rhythm with each other, you and I and the rest of the real-life JRPG party. I love that. Yes, well, and sometimes the sales are too good to pass up, Chrissy, and God knows I have plenty of titles like that. I'll put it this way. I have become more willing to impulse buy especially cheap, shorter games on sales on the virtual stores, and for games that I really value and want to honor in my collection, I have become much more willing to immediately impulse buy things like collector's editions or steelbooks to do them justice and make them the kind of thing that can be displayed on things like my shelves, which I'm always excited to tweet about because you know me and my collections, which I guess, like we were saying last time, maybe casts me as a villain in these games. But if I'm cast in these games at all, I'll take the W. That'll be the decision that we have to come to at some point too, as with all of these games. With which party member do you identify the most closely in this game, and why? I guess we should make that a mainstay of all of the playthroughs that we embark on together, because we've gotten around to that question in all of them, I think, but we've never really explicitly asked it. I'll say, for my part, I think I mentioned it at the outset of the Graces stream that I felt a special attachment to Pascal, and I think it's fair to say you probably all saw that borne out across the course of the playthrough. I think I also, as you all know, deeply resonate with Malik, but I think that might be more of an aspirational identification, but might also be one of those cases where we could all speak for each other better than for ourselves. So we'll see how it goes. And yes, Pottery, thank you for asking. But yes, I think I made the executive decision after last time with Graces that it is an insult to these games not to watch the opening movie together. And also I looked into it, and while there are, copyright considerations around them, they're all like permitted to be used for the purposes of streaming. So we're all good. That will be part of our entree into the game to get that exposure together. I was going to be looking into the nomenclature of the world as we got further into it, Grail. So yeah, you're one step ahead of me actually, but large maximum, I love that. Until we have more philosophically substantive reasons for the naming of the world, I'm just going to be calling it large max because I love that. So there you go. All right, my dear friends. Yes, that's the goal. A man aspires to speak with his back. That's the goal, as Malik has taught us. Jameson Price, I mentioned this last week. I'm going to be looking for you in this, my boy, and to see what other voice actors we have besides. All right, my friends. Welcome back to Tales of Praxis. It's so nice to see you again. I can't wait to see where our 7th journey in this literary study of this masterpiece series of video games takes us. So let's not wait any longer. What do you think, Mila? We're finally playing your game. So, Grail is reminding me, if you're not keeping an eye on the chat, that I've already made one mistake by forgetting about my old save data, but that proves the point that I have started this game more than once, because now I am remembering, yes, actually the game is one of those that does not introduce you to the opening until you actually start a new game, so apologies for that. But now I think from there we're gonna get fresh access to the game without spoilers, and I think, as we're saying, it's an opening that is worth seeing, even if it is right off the bat. I will tell you, for my part, something that has remained remarkable to me through the years, because I probably made my first attempt at Xillia back in, God, maybe 2015, so probably almost 10 years ago at this point. And despite never getting very far in it, that opening song remains seared in my mind. I think to the point that you're talking about, Grail, it's just, for me, the music really hits. Just that opening riff, like the main melody of da 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 da, like so cool. In a way that, like, that to me for the last decade has been distinctively Tales of Xillia, even though I don't even know what it means for something to be Tales of Xillia, which I think is a great testament to an opening. I will play it on moderate, Grail. Thank you for pushing me. Okay, that's a good adjustment, and we'll see. We'll see now that Aaron is deeper into to streaming if he can actually battle competently throughout a stream in the way that he would if he were off stream. So I promise you, I've been playing all of Hearts on hard, and that's usually what I do with these games off stream. I think also, and you guys might correct me here, but I think that's also a remarkable opening because unless my memory is failing me, it was the first Western localization to get like the Japanese opening with like the Japanese lyrics, because in the past it would be, we'd either get some kind of instrumental adaptation or English lyrics if you go back and watch the other openings. And since Xillia, not always, but in most of the mainline games, like with the Vesperia opening and Tales of Arise, you get the Japanese opening now with the Japanese lyrics, which I love, and I think having that kind of more direct access to the way it was originally published is pretty cool. It's something I've been appreciating also about having the subtitles rather than the dubbed voices in Tales of Hearts, as much as I love the English voice acting, as we've been singing the praises of all of them. Radiant Mythology. Okay, yes, and that's another one of my my sub gaps, Grail. So we'll see once we get there. Yeah, it would be cool to get a lyrics translation also. That's something that I have not looked into yet, but I'll tell you, back when I was experiencing Tales of the Abyss for the first time, and discovered that, it's not actually just a great guitar riff. It's an instrumentalization of a great song by a band with a great name, Bump of Chicken, and the song is called Karma. Maybe I'll get my friend who knows Japanese to translate the lyrics for me. So I got Dan to do that, and that added a whole other layer of meaning to the game for me, which was really cool. So yeah, especially for a Western audience, I think mystique is a great word, Chrissy. I think as like an analyst thinking about these games, it also is almost a special thing for someone who doesn't speak Japanese, because it foregrounds kind of the emotional thematic content without being able to understand the lyrics, and also kind of foregrounds that there is more to understand in the game if you take the time to actually translate and sit down and interpret it, something which is so important for making sense of these long, elaborate, philosophically minded games, the Tales games. Oh yes, and also to be clear, I love the English versions that we have gotten. So things like Ring a Bell, also for Tales of Vesperia, right? Absolute banger in English. So it's not to speak ill of those, but I do think there is something special and cool about us getting the Japanese as well, and that's cool, Grail. I didn't know that about the Graces one, so that's nice to learn too. I like having both, and honestly, maybe that's the solution as we get further into the gaming relationship between Japan and the West, because I'm with you on Karma as well, Pottery. Like, I love the lyric version. I love that it has lyrics, but also there is something so cool about the melody line on guitar, especially with it playing over the intro sequence that they have, that AMV for Tales of the Abyss. And so being able to pick and choose, okay, which one do I want to start with out of like a menu of options might be fun and cool at some point. Listen to us, Bamco. We have cool ideas about different things to add to the subsequent games. Oh, I feel that nostalgia for Symphonia there, Grail, so I'm certainly not gonna knock you for that. All right, friends. Well, see, this is what we get for starting a new game together, which Aaron has only partially played before. We're literally not past the options screen, and I'm already gushing. So you knew what you signed up for, though. I was very clear. So that's good. I was going to ask you which was your favorite, Grail, because you did drop that this was your second favorite. All right. Well, that's all the more reason we got to find ways to get access to those ones that haven't been officially localized, so that we can expand Tales of Praxis appropriately. See, the other Tales of Praxis thing. We are literally just starting a new game, and we're already talking about all the other games. Wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah, we can play with those as we go on, Pottery, for sure.
spirits are dying. I fear the power of Spyrix is behind this. We should investigate. So how long has it been? 6 years? Time sure flies. Come. Fenmont awaits.
Dreams and wishes are fulfilled. Such is the life of all who live in Riza and Maxia, where hope springs eternal. The spirits have the power to bring man's wishes to fruition. And in turn, those wishes preserve and protect the spirit's livelihood. Therefore, it could be said that Maxwell, the Lord of the Spirits, is in fact the guardian of all things. In this world, no known evil exists that could threaten this harmonious cycle. But if one did, perhaps it might lurk in the hearts of men.
That's a Fantasia illusion, also, if you didn't clock that.
Hey! Oh, so sorry! Hey! Sorry! I gotta move.
That's right, Grail. I forgot that, but yes, it is good to keep in mind. I had forgotten this was an anniversary title for the series because it came out. What year did we just decide it came out? 2011. So about like 15 years for the series. Yeah, it must have been the 15-year anniversary thereabouts. So there you go. Keep an eye out for other Easter eggs. Thank you for catching Van's voice actor. We should just look up his name because he's so great and I'm forgetting his name too. Van Grant's voice actor. Michael McConaughey, my man. Yes. Somehow one of those crazy things where in the original credits of Tales of the Abyss he wasn't even credited, but yes, an amazing performance. Yeah, the flower in the middle definitely good to keep track of. You mean just in terms of flowers? You mean pottery? Yeah, or lotuses. Yeah, I noticed that was an interesting thing even in that intro animation because you had the light coming down from the windows of the room in which, well, we can get her name so we can start talking about her, in which Mila was sitting. Right, and there were those 8 windows, which I don't think we've talked about 8 so much here, but it's very much like it's a Buddhist number in reference to stuff like the Eightfold Path, right, for achieving enlightenment and practicing Buddhism and stuff like that. But of course, juxtaposed against probably one of the most classic Christian symbols in the world, the snake threatening her, right, and entering the garden. So already a million interesting symbols to keep track of, and we're all of 2 minutes into this. So character select. We have, oh, good, yes, and good just to keep track of flowers more broadly, pottery, awesome. And a good thing to keep track of, especially if they're big in this game, to remember that it's right after Tales of Graces, and we talked flowers to death in Tales of Graces, so that chronological continuity too. So we have Mila, a mysterious young woman accompanied by 4 unseen beings. She comes across as calm, collected, and wise beyond her years. And we have Jude, a kind, clever medical student who left home to attend school in the capital city. Poised to graduate, Jude is eager to find his purpose in life. I'll tell you, and like I said, I'm not going to belabor the things that might have made it harder for me to access this game, because I do think it mostly came down to me finding it at the wrong time. But things that I noted at the time as feeling different and maybe making it a little harder for me to get into than the average game was first, so we're going to play as Jude to go into this. And for whatever reason, it might be worth digging further into this, maybe not. But in a series where oftentimes the main hero is something like just a kid from the country, or a swordsman, or a hunter, or something that is kind of more traditionally embedded in fantasy tropes, the idea of the hero being a medical student, which felt much more like evocative of the real world. And what kind of fantasy world would it be for there not only to be medicine, but also the kind of educational infrastructure behind medicine that we're used to in reality? I think that made it a little harder for the slightly more cynical young Aaron to buy into right off the bat. And then also notice right in that intro scene with Mila, we already had a colored term that, the spirits are dying, and she feared it might be the work of Spyrix. And I remember, even by the standards of the Tales series, and we'll see this in short order, but I remember it as introducing us to a barrage of pretty technical fantasy terms. And Potter, you have a term for this, like a specific kind of jargon, so I'll let you remind us in the chat. But I felt like it was kind of front-loaded with those, which I don't have a problem with per se, but again, I think coupled with it finding me at the wrong time made it a little harder for me to find a point of entry into. So that's my only piece that I'm going to say about that. That's interesting too, Pottery. Yep, definitely after coming out of all of the color theory that we did in Tales of Graces F, seeing black associated with medicine feels like something that is worth keeping our eye on at the very least. Oh, does it push Mila on us, Grail? I think it was a 2-direction choice, and I just happened to nudge the right arrow, so I don't think that's what happened, but I wasn't paying a ton of attention, to be perfectly honest with you. Fantasy babble. I feel like what you came up with last time was quippier, but maybe I'm working from a fantasy in my head, speaking of fantasies. But yes, we all know what we're talking about. All right. Jude, you're eager to find your purpose in life. Join the club. Let's see what you have to offer us, my boy. And we're off to the races. And yeah, so I mentioned this during the intro sequence, but I tried to fix the balance a little bit. If it needs more fixing, just let me know. I'm happy to play with that as always. Oh, I see what you mean, Grail. Yes, that is an interesting way of contextualizing it.
You okay? Those documents must be for the registrar's office.
Yeah, thanks for helping out. You sure you have time for this? Don't you have residency training with Professor House?
Don't worry about
Professor
that.
House.
You're in a rush too, aren't you?
Shoot, you're right. Thanks again. You better get moving too.
I accidentally started playing my favorite TV show instead of a new JRPG.
Be late.
All right, press R1, the Navi button on the field to view your current objective. Nice, so that's carrying over from Graces. You can also check your current objective or read a detailed synopsis of the story from the event list on the menu. Grumpy Guy with Cane! Sherlock Lorry in the Chamber of Secrets. How many more jokes can we make about House MD before this playthrough is done, I wonder? Alright. That all seems pretty standard. Okay, good. I'll never have another question about navigation. Oh, so we can play around with the camera quite a bit, even indoors. So already that's more of a degree of freedom in terms of our vantage point on the world than what we got in something like Grace's. Almost more evocative of where they would go in Zestiria and onwards. That's right. Or to paraphrase Pottery, goodbye to fixed cameras. All right, so we're heading to reception at the medical school. All right. Won't anyone let me copy their notes? Jude, you have good handwriting, right? Do you mind? Oh yeah, have you been following that, Chrissy? I haven't. Is there, have we gotten any updates or stuff like that? Mana is a form of energy that spirits need to function. Oh, we're already learning more about mana. It is produced by the mana lobes in our brains and can be given to spirits in exchange for the use of a spirit art. Okay, so this is the fundamental structure of spirit arts, and yes, it will be on the test. Alright, so already I can tell you were totally right, Pottery. I didn't realize that it was going to auto-advance even the text in just one-off conversations, so we're going to stop that. I'm okay with instant, though. That's fine. Cool. So that is already exactly the kind of really interesting nuance that I was saying I was hoping for. So this is not the kind of thing that we get in something like Symphonia or Vesperia, but mana is in fact produced by lobes in the human brain and can be given to spirits as a way of using spirit arts. So kind of a magical foundation explaining the structure that accounts for what the voiceover in the introduction was saying about how spirits are able to actualize the dreams of people in this kind of harmonious balance. Spirit arts form the foundation of nearly every aspect of our daily lives. Indeed, we may have spirit arts to thank for human civilization existing at all, which is why I'm assigning everyone to write a report about how we use spirit arts today and how we might use them in the future. Let's see, for everyday examples of spirit arts usage, there's lantern trees and home trees, which is a key term, and all the fire arts. Oh, and isn't the water supply and irrigation system controlled by water-type spirit arts? Oh, there are so many examples, I don't even know where to start. I think one of the interesting points of contrast to think about in terms of formats of exposition, even within the Tales series, and this will maybe not land because, again, we haven't played Tales of Eternia together, but there is a researcher character in Eternia as well, and you don't meet him right away. One of your first objectives is to go and find him in the main research institute of the world. And that ends up being an interesting setup for learning about the world because, you know, when you're in an educational research institution context, like we're getting in these first few conversations that Jude is listening into, it does kind of give us a natural motivation within the world to learn about things to which players don't have access, which can be a great way of becoming ingratiated with just the mechanistic way. But it is interesting for that to be what's happening right off the bat, and maybe that's an artifact of having chosen Jude instead of Mila. We would have to play both in order to know, but I like the way that Eternia does it because you have an inciting incident and the opportunity to explore the world without really understanding what's going on before you get to the research institute, and so it feels more like your questions are being answered at that point, whereas starting here at the equivalent research institute, you're sort of getting all of the explanation without having really seen the world yet. Although we don't really know Jude yet either, right? That might actually, in fact, be an interesting way of mirroring our experience with his character if he's someone who's just been holed up studying and has not really seen the world up to this point in his life. Yeah, Grail, I knew you'd know what I was talking about. I'll keep that in mind and explore whether I feel that resonates or not throughout the rest of this, because Keel is definitely some kind of character. The most popular character in Japan, as we decided, for whatever reason. And how are we supposed to come up with everyday uses of spirit arts? That stuff's so mundane, I don't even notice it. Boy, can Aaron speak on a Monday? Damn it. Then I guess I'll just have a pulled pork scone. You're a minute too late. We just sold out of Rapig burgers. Ah, Rapigs exist in this world. Excellent. So this is also kind of a cool elaboration of a system that we saw in an earlier stage in Tales of Graces. All of the NPCs have indicators of when there's new dialogue for us to hear. So those indicators, you might remember, in Tales of Graces were just used to mark like little side quests or key scenes, not just new dialogue from any old NPC. But now it looks like it's become an easier marker for keeping track of when there's anyone who has something to say that you have not heard yet, which is kind of cool. Okay, so we are there, and we are heading out to reception? Mamma mia.
Tardiness won't get me any extra credit with a professor. Let's see, what building was he in again?
Oh, and notice, so Jude clearly isn't in his intro costume yet, but this might bolster the point that you are pointing to, Pottery, because as a medical student, he is starting out in white, which is kind of the more traditional medical color of healing and all of that good, pure stuff. So it'll be interesting to see when and why he dons the adventure black clothes that we saw in the opening. No, I know you're being serious. There's a reason that's a hill on which you choose to die. It's interesting because, so my first impression of where we are right now, Fenmont, with the camera that we can freely manipulate, is less so than something like a Tales of Zestiria. It almost feels like we're in the kind of city we would find in Tales of Vesperia, but we have access to looking around in it a little more, which to me almost gives us more of a sense of place in it. So I kind of, right now, given the rest of the world design, I find myself enjoying it a little more than I did in something like Zestiria or Vesperia, for whatever that's worth. Yes, it is a pretty city for sure. Ha ha ha. Strange your mana lobe? Did you find a new way to channel the four great spirits or something? I say you got a headache from staying up all night studying at the last minute. I've been cramming all day for my spirit arts exam, and now my head feels like it's going to explode. I must have strained my mana lobe. Something that's interesting about the last two conversations that we eavesdropped into was that I spoke to both of the NPCs in them in the wrong order, apparently, because this guy was clearly talking in response to what this girl was saying, which is also just an interesting small idiosyncrasy of the design, because like there are many games, and even many Tales games, like Hearts is like this, where if you go up to a pair of NPCs who are talking to one another, you can initiate talking to either of them, and you'll just see the dialogue flow from one to the other of them in whatever the actual conversational order is. So it's interesting that they chose not to do that here. I have good news, Grail. I'm going to force it all back into your mind soon. Won't that be fun? Let's see. The four great spirits. Fire spirit, Ifrit. Water spirit, Undini. Wind spirit, Sylph. Earth spirit, Gnome. Yeah, see, so along with the familiar mana comes all of the familiar trappings, including all of the spirits that we know all too well from our previous adventures. Ah, don't talk to me while I'm trying to study. Well, I should say I'm going to be force-feeding you at least the good parts of Vesperia again, Grail, so you'll be thanking me. It won't feel like eating your vegetables. Well, unless you like vegetables. I like vegetables. The perpetual night of Fenmont is a type of spirit climb known as night climb. Something like a biome or a weather pattern, perhaps? Outpatient wing, okay. Which I think is this way, right? Yeah, okay. Or was this the way I came? Oh, no, I'm right. At least in terms of how the game says it, Grail, it varies, which is one of the little pronunciation frustrations.
Professor House, are you leaving?
So, like, Sheena will say Undini, but if you go back to how Tales of Fantasia was localized, Klaus calls her Undine. So that is my textually grounded way of saying I could not tell you.
Well, look who decided to show up.
Yeah. Sorry I'm late.
Worry not, lad. Now, keep this between us, but I've been asked to help down at the lab. Top secret research, they say.
A request right from Orda Palace? Wow.
It is a little frustrating with the kind of indiscriminate nature of the auto advance option for the text, because in these kinds of voiced scenes, it would be useful for me to just have them automatically advance the text so it almost feels more like a cutscene. But then when it's not voiced, it's much more useful for Aaron to go at his own pace.
I need you to keep an eye on things until I get back. You can handle it, lad. Only patients with appointments will be coming in today.
What? Oh, right. I need you to sign my class credit form.
Your graduation thesis is coming along, I presume?
More or less. I should have the first draft ready by Ignis.
That's cutting things close, don't you think? The end of a race is no time to start slowing down.
Yeah, for sure, Grail. This is certainly better than
I'm planning to make you my top assistant after you graduate.
better than having everything auto advance. That's interesting though, because that little piece did auto advance, even though I didn't press anything. It's maddeningly inconsistent. And if there's anyone watching who has just dropped in, so Tales of Praxis is not largely little nitpicks of systems. I'm mostly just getting my feet into the systems of this new game after being in a number of games that do it quite differently. But we're going to get into the thematic content and analysis as we work into it. So,
Thank you, Professor.
I'll be back in a few hours.